So this is my leopard gecko Trico, and this is Yoshi. I've had them for, absolutely forever now, like 8 or 9 years at this point, and they are both overdue for an upgrade. Especially Yoshi, he has outgrown his tank significantly, so today I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to upgrade their enclosures. Conveniently, I've had this 20-gallon long enclosure sitting around. Up until this point, I've just been using it to store drugs. For YouTube's sake, I need to clarify that this is not cocaine. It is calcium powder, which I need to dust my gecko's feeder insects with, so they don't get metabolic bone disease and die a horrible, awful, painful death. Anyways, this enclosure should work quite well for Yoshi's new home. To start off, I stole some XPS foam from the walls of a local orphanage. But you can also find this at Home Depot or your local hardware store. I think I grabbed too much, I'm not gonna lie, but it's okay. Those orphans can live without some insulation during these harsh New York winters. With this foam, I'm going to attempt to create a realistic backdrop that looks like rocks. Which, you can't see the vision right now because it's purple foam. The reason I'm using foam is because it's extremely lightweight, opposed to rocks, which are not, and Yoshi's enclosure will be going on the top shelf, so I want it to be light. So what I'm doing right now is measuring how long I want the backdrop to be. This was incredibly difficult and confusing because the measuring tape was marked off at 2 inches, so it kept throwing me off. After getting the measurements done, I started cutting the foam. It was pretty hard cutting the foam into straight pieces. I think I was projecting my sexuality into this enclosure build. Nonetheless, it worked out because, as I said, I wanted to replicate a naturalistic stone backdrop. So the backdrop didn't have to be perfectly straight, just like me. Then I took a heat gun to the foam pieces, mainly because after cutting them, they had rough, jagged edges and parts where the foam was flaking off. So the heat gun helped smooth everything out and strengthen the foam after being cut. I then attached the foam to the aquarium using some aquarium-safe silicone. The directions said apply in a well-ventilated area, which I did not do. For the next 24 hours while the silicone dried, I had a headache, so I probably have cancer now. It also smelled awful. It smelled like vinegar and piss. The only time I want to smell that is on the New York City subway. To ensure the silicone dried flush, I held it down with some rocks. I didn't use your average rocks, though. I used fossil rocks. Not to flex or anything, but, I just have a bunch of these laying around. But that's also mainly because I no longer live in Hurdle Holler, Yeehaw Land. I live in a city now. So rocks are hard to come by now. The only rocks that are easy for me to find here is crack rock. Speaking of rocks, the next step was cutting out some naturalistic rocks for the backdrop. This was one of the most enjoyable parts of making the backdrop, but also the most time-consuming. Going into it, I didn't really have a plan as to how I wanted the rocks to look, and I think this is where the idea for the enclosure started to shift. Initially, I wanted the enclosure to replicate the natural habitat of leopard gecko's native range, that being the Middle East. But if I made it look too accurate, the United States government would invade my house for oil. Leopard geckos occupy arid and semi-arid environments in the wild, so I decided to turn the enclosure into something more similar to that of the American Southwest. Although not necessarily accurate to their native habitat, it is an arid environment, and as a plus, I think it looks cool. Now, I won't lie, I think this random change in direction for the enclosure might have come from the fact that while I was building this enclosure, I also had a Minecraft world with my family where we built like a Wild West themed town in the Badlands biome. paired with the fact that I'm just a sucker for the American Southwest, I think that's where this kind of shift in the idea came from. So now I was turning Yoshi into a proper cowpoke. With this new change in direction, I started layering the foam rocks to mimic the same stacked look of the Grand Canyon, or, what the Grand Canyon is based on, the Minecraft Badlands biome. When I was done sculpting the foam rocks, I attached them together using silicone and toothpicks to hold them in place. And I started placing them in the enclosure using spray foam and silicone to hold them in place. And to attach the rock ledges to the wall, I used toothpicks again to hold them up while the silicone dried. And for a nice centerpiece, I took this dead wood I got from the pet store and attached it to a foam rock that I made to kind of make it appear as if it were growing out of it. And this further kind of added to the clear inspiration from that Minecraft world I was playing on. One might say this dead branch is like a dead bush. Oh. Kill me. But at this point, you can finally get sort of an idea as to how this enclosure is going to look. To make it look more naturalistic, I started chipping away at the smooth pieces of foam. For the spray foam, removing the outer layer exposed spongy-looking foam that almost looked like igneous lava rocks. And I will tell you, this whole process was very time-consuming and made quite a mess. But it was worth it. Once again, it left the remaining foam looking jagged with flaky pieces hanging off, so I used the heat gun again to smooth everything out and strengthen the foam. And now the fun part, painting. I wanted the backdrop to look realistic, so I got some sanded grout. I forgot to buy a paint mixer, so I ended up mixing it with a paintbrush, so that paintbrush is ruined now. This will not only act as a protective layer for the foam, but it will add a rough, gritty, sandy texture to help really sell the rock look, essentially. I wish I could have just left it as a layer of grout and nothing else, because in my opinion, it looked quite nice. The issue is that grout is not waterproof, so that could lead to many complications. So to seal the grout, I am using dry lock. I started by mixing black, non-toxic acrylic paint in with the first layer of dry lock. I wanted the first layer to be a dark gray so future coats could bring out the highlights of the rocks. Once again, I forgot to buy a paint mixer, so I'm using a frickin' spatula to mix the dry lock. I am an idiot. Once applied, I waited for it to dry fully before painting on more layers. Once dry, I added the highlighting layers of dry lock. I mixed brown, orange, and white acrylic paint in with the dry lock to create a nice terracotta clay color. In the end, I think it turned out quite nice, very clearly inspired by the Minecraft world. Next, I want to add plants, but I can't add plants without soil. So now I'm making some nice arid dirt by mixing topsoil, sand, and eco-earth, and excavator clay, and charcoal. Don't ask me the ratio of all of this because I forgot. I kind of eyeballed it and was like, hey, this looks good. This looks about right. But majority of the soil is the topsoil, so plants can grow in it. Once I had the dirt all mixed up and looking like, well, dirt, I added it to the enclosure. Now it was time to add the plants. The first plant I put up here because I think it looks cool. Don't ask me what type of plant it is, I forgot. I got all the plants from Josh's Frogs, which are categorized into different climates, so all I had to do was select arid or semi-arid and pick out which ones I thought were cool. but I didn't do that. I selected the random plants option, so I had Josh himself from Josh's Frogs, or just a random guy who works for Josh's Frogs. But also, his name could be Josh. Whoever it was, they picked the plants out for me, and I think they did a good job. The plants look cool, I think. Next, I'm adding some sphagnum moss under this rock formation. I'd like it to act as Yoshi's humid hide, since previously he was using a modified Chinese Tupperware container. It may be ugly, but Yoshi has always had shedding issues, so that Tupperware container with moss inside it actually did wonders holding in humidity. And I will say, I found that this kind of rock structure that I made with the sphagnum moss does hold in humidity very well. I think this helps because there's so many plants near it. When I water the plants, the water kind of seeps under there, so it's much more consistently humid. Then I added this Smilodon skull. Although it doesn't necessarily fit with the theme, Yoshi needed another place he could hide under, and I thought it looked cool. No other explanation. Now I'm adding some more sphagnum moss and some corkwood. This corkwood will act as a nice shelter for the cleanup crew I'll be adding in the future. And if Yoshi decides to, well, he can dig under it. Then I started adding some leaf litter to the enclosure. I went with oak leaves. I forgot the exact species of oak, but I felt out of all the options Josh's Frogs had, the oak fit the arid environment the most. I wasn't going to use any mango leaves or Galapagos Mongolia leaf litter. We're here for true realism. I want my geckos to feel like Jim Carrey in The Truman Show. For the next touch of nature, a false sun. Oh my god, it's beautiful. I'm gonna bust. Oh shit. Oh! Okay, now I'm not done with Yoshi's enclosure just yet, but I'm going to move on to Trico's so I can introduce them and the cleanup crew to both enclosures at the same time. But Trico already lives in a decent-sized enclosure, so instead of starting from a blank canvas, I'm gonna be moving him to a temporary smaller enclosure and cleaning out / upgrading his current one. Yeah, how's it feel, Trico, to live in a smaller enclosure like Yoshi, huh? How's it feel? Okay, so Trico is named after the Pokemon Trico, which is a gecko Pokemon. Very clever. Initially, I had the idea to give his enclosure a theme as I did for Yoshi. My idea was to make it based on Route 111 from Pokémon Emerald, the best Pokemon game and the game that Trico is from. I wanted to get like Cacnea and ball toy decorations. I don't know where I'd find those. Maybe stickers of them to put on the enclosure just to kind of go along with the theme. Okay, so the first step is to clean out Trico's enclosure. I started by removing all of the decorations and hides and such. To remove the substrate and poop, I used a vacuum. The sphagnum moss would get stuck in it sometimes, so I had to throw that out separately. Then I started to remove the Velcro and stickers that appeared to have been stuck to this enclosure since the Precambrian, because holy shit, they were a pain in the ass to remove. At this point, I had also started cleaning the enclosure itself, so it would turn out looking good as new. The rock tunnel looking structures I left in the enclosure is dried excavator clay. I decided I was going to keep them in the enclosure because I'm lazy. But also, instead of using foam as a backdrop for Trico's enclosure, I wanted to use some leftover excavator clay because I'm lazy. Trico is going on the bottom of the shelf, so the enclosure's weight is less of a concern. Also, excavator clay dries to look very nice for an arid theme. So I started by adding the excavator clay, which was a complete mess. I started with the backdrop, which was, very simple. I just applied a thin layer of the clay to the back of the enclosure. That's about it. I decided I wanted to add on to the tunnels that I had made previously for his enclosure. So using some bottle cans to hold up the clay, I built a cave-like structure out of the clay. Believe it or not, bottle cans are not a part of leopard gecko's natural environment. Although they're probably common in leopard gecko environments and just about every environment in the world, these cans were only acting as a placeholder so the clay could dry around them. Once I was done placing the clay backdrop, I was able to start adding the soil and plants. Since I didn't have to wait for the paint to dry like Yoshi's enclosure or, toxic fumes to dissipate into the air, I figured it couldn't hurt to get the plants started in this enclosure, so Yoshi and Trico could be added into their new enclosures the same day. I do know one of the plants I added in here was an aloe plant, but whatever those tall, thin plants I added are called, I forgot the name of, they look super cool, and they absolutely took off. But just like that, Trico's enclosure was just about done. All I had to do was wait for the clay to dry. Once dry, I was able to remove the cans. And it did not turn out how I wanted it to, but it's whatever, it works. I started adding sphagnum moss to this area because this will be where Trico's humid hide goes. I then added some leaf litter and some corkwood that Trico had in his previous enclosure. Overall, Yoshi and Trico's enclosures were looking great, but I felt like they were missing something. An appearance from the rock. Not the rock, some rocks. So I smashed apart this large rock that was previously in Trico's enclosure, and I started adding the fragments to both Yoshi and Trico's enclosure. Not a huge difference, but I don't know, I just wanted random rocks in there. At this point, Yoshi and Trico's enclosures were at the same point in the build process, so it was time for me to add the cuck. Cuck is an abbreviation for cleanup crew, not you. For the cuck, I chose some powder blue isopods and some springtails. These guys will help clean up the enclosure by eating the gecko's poop and any decaying or moldy material in the enclosure. Lastly, I added the last of Yoshi and Trico's stuff to their new enclosures, so they had some familiarity when they moved in. And just like that, the enclosures were done. I added Yoshi first. He glanced around in confusion before he immediately disappeared into his hide. Trico, on the other hand, he did the exact same thing. But after a while of sitting around, Yoshi finally came out and decided to explore. Instead of walking out the front exit of his hide, he decided to dig a completely new way out, which really shows you how smart he is. But hey, at least he's enjoying his new home. That's what matters. As the months passed, I saw Yoshi's enclosure in particular evolve into a thriving ecosystem. Which is so weird to me because Yoshi's enclosure is made out of foam and a bunch of fake stuff, whereas Trico's is made out of a bunch of naturalistic material. I don't know. That's weird. But anyways, I noticed a small mushroom growing near one of Yoshi's plants. No idea how that got there, but it's still pretty cool. Yoshi also had a roommate move in, this adorable little jumping spider. I'm assuming it's because of the abundant springtails and isopods. The jumping spider most likely is eating those, but all in all, this turned out very cool. Well, there's that. My geckos got new and improved tanks. I hope they enjoy them as much as I do. And which one is your favorite? Comment down below or whatever, I don't know. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support future projects, check out my Patreon, leave a like, subscribe, all that BS. Otherwise, fuck off.